My name is Kibo Nagasaki. The title of my project is Survival of Indigenous Ancestors. Indigenous ancestors are considered to migrate from Siberia to Canada in the last glacial period. In the post-ice age, large groups could move with agriculture, but during the glacial period, I think only a small group could migrate with hunting. For example, a large unit of the Imperial Japanese Army was almost wiped out from the extreme cold snow. The unit of travel and movement of the Inuit people in Canada and Greenland and the hunters in Africa is 1 to a few families. So, one question was raised. How likely do indigenous ancestors survive when they migrate to Canada? The purpose of this project was to create a math model to calculate the survival probability of indigenous ancestors and to study how likely they could survive. I considered these factors. When I created the math model, I referred to the mortality and fertility by previous studies. Then I set these expected female life expectancies and means childbirth intervals. The left figure shows the mortality rate of these cases, and the right figure shows the fertility rate of these cases. This is a flow of the model I created. These are the initial parameters I considered in my calculations. Then I calculated new childbirth, death, and new marriage each year. When the number of people in a group exceeded 500, survival succeeded, and when it reached 0, it failed. Marriage age was determined from a study of Japanese females in the Neolithic era. 500 people of survival was determined from the population of endangered Aleut people in Russia. In this project, the reference case was unintentional migration with 2 families in a monogamy community. I compared the intentional migration case, the polygamy case, and the late and early marriage case with the reference case. Furthermore, I changed the number of families and the survival threshold. I calculated how many times indigenous ancestors survived out of the 1,000 calculations and repeated it 10 times. This is the screen for my calculations with my model. These are some of the calculations. This succeeded 607 out of 1,000. The second one succeeded 592 out of 1,000. And the third one succeeded 598 out of 1,000. Now I will explain the results of discussion. These show unintentional migration versus intentional migration. The number of survival in intentional migration was much larger than that of unintentional migration. Then I applied the logistic regression analysis. Here, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta are regression coefficients. The logistic regression analysis could fit well. Beta was positive value while gamma was a negative value. These are reasonable. The odd ratio of intentional to unintentional migration was 7.900. I applied the same procedure to the polygamy case and late and early marriage case. From the odd ratios of intentional migration, polygamy and early marriage to reference case, I found that the priority for survival was firstly the polygamy community, secondly the intentional migration, and thirdly the early marriage. And from the values of regression coefficients, beta and gamma, I also found that the polygamy community was the most robust for mortality and fertility. I found that the migration with 4 or 6 people practically had no chance of survival. On the other hand, the migration with many people increased their survival chance, but this was considered not realistic as I explained. In my model, even if all but one community member are females, all females could get married, so the polygamy case shows the upper limit of survival. Therefore, the survival probability of indigenous ancestors was not negligible, but actually small. This strongly suggests, by making full use of wisdom, knowledge, experience, and other traits beyond the factors I considered in this project, the indigenous ancestors survived, fostered their cultures, and conveying them to their descendants today. These are my conclusions. I could find that priority for the survival of indigenous ancestors and the robustness for the polygamy community. I also found, even in the polygamy community, the survival chance of indigenous ancestors were small. I did not show the results due to time limit, but I found that the increasing threshold did not change the survival probability. This was my first experience creating a math model. It was very difficult to verify and validate my model. I studied the C language of programming harder by reading books and www sites about programming, and finally I could complete the math model by myself. Throughout my project, I had the opportunity not only to create a math model, but to be able to study the lifestyle and social values of indigenous people. And I could know how wise and brave the indigenous people were, so I could fully enjoy my project. If I had a chance to continue this project, I want to study and quantify the wisdom and knowledge of indigenous people and incorporate it into my model. Finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Joshua Rassett and all the people at BASEC. These are the references used in my presentation. Thank you for your attention.